Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something people call a classic. In this case, I don't know if anybody calls it I think people call this a classic. But anyway, usually what we do is we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it while we drink something inspired by the classic. We have got fresh meat, new blood in the podcasting studio or in the virtual podcasting studio this week. My name's Dave McArthur, but this time we got somebody different by the name of
Nate Wolf, long-time listener, first-time guest host.
Definitely. I think that completes my bingo card of all the people that I knew in high school having appeared on this podcast.
You saved the best for last, obviously.
Obviously, yeah. Although there's a couple of people that are such Luddites that I wouldn't even ask them. And I think you know a couple of the guys I'm talking about. But
Sure.
we'll see. So I read this book randomly. The book we have is Burr by Gore Vidal. And I read this book randomly. I just have a list of books that I'm getting through. I had previously read Julian, which is about Julian the Apostate, takes place in sort of the 3rd century of the Roman Empire. I thought it was great. So when I saw that there was a Burr book, I decided I'd read it. I read it randomly, and right about, 15 pages from the end of the book, it occurred to me that you had told me years ago, I don't know how old you were, 10 or something, that you did a biography, like a book.
Yeah, so I think it was like 4th grade, and we were supposed to read a biography about an historical figure. And I remember going through like this section of biographies or whatever, and there's this old dusty looking book, and I pulled it out, and it was a guy I'd never heard of, Aaron Burr. And I asked my teacher about him, and she kind of briefly described him as the like founding father scoundrel. And I was like, that sounds awesome. And
Teacher knew who he was off the top of her head?
Yeah, she did.
Nice.
She did.
Nice.
And, I read the book, and I tried to actually find it when you sent me the book and asked me to do this with you. But I remember it not being very negative. I mean, pretty much anything, if you Google right now or whatever, any synopsis that comes up, it doesn't really put Aaron Burr in anything but incredibly negative tone.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Like, I actually remember his name just scanning through a list of presidents and vice presidents, Aaron Burr, like he was Thomas Jefferson's vice president. That was the only familiarity I had. Then he gets a bump in, I don't know, about 1992 from this milk commercial. I don't know.
Right.
If you remember that?
That's what
where the guy,
I forgot. Amber.
Yeah, the very, very goofy looking guy works at the Museum of Alexander Hamilton and gets a phone call with the $10,000 question asking him who shot Alexander Hamilton. And obviously he knows, but he's just filled his mouth with peanut butter. So he's like, so he loses.
Yeah.
And it was just, great commercial. I don't know. I mean, milk, I'm not 100% sure that milk is the best substance for dissolving peanut butter. I don't remember learning.
No, I would not do that. But it was a famous director who directed that commercial too. I don't know.
Spike Jonze or somebody like that?
No, somebody that you wouldn't expect to. Spike Jonze, I think, is pretty famous for his commercials even before he got into theatrical film.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. He did videos and things, so he might be that kind of guy. But
and that's about the time Spike Jonze was doing like MTV stuff and all that kind of stuff. But,
yeah, exactly. But anyway, really, the commercial stuck, and I think that was, the first bump in Aaron Burr's fame was probably being a vice president and trying to tear the country apart and shooting Alexander Hamilton in 1800 or so. Then the second was the milk commercial, and then the third is obviously the Ron Chernow book, and then Into the Stratosphere with Hamilton the musical. That's, I think, probably most people these days might be able to name the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton. Anybody who's paying attention at all. It's pretty trivia question when we were kids.
Yeah, definitely. When I read that biography in 4th grade, I asked my parents. They were like, "Yeah, I kind of know the name" or something like that. But he wasn't a name that everybody, he was a footnote for the most part. But
pretty much a vice president.
The biography that I read wasn't negative. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, he's this great person up here, and should be standing with Jefferson and Washington and all these other people. But it certainly didn't paint him in his negative tone as you pretty much get in pretty much every other source that you come across. And I just really kind of, as a 10-year-old or whatever, just thought this guy was living this wild, crazy life. And so I became kind of a soft spot for him. So if he ever came up, like the Aaron Burr commercial, when that started happening, I was like, I'd tell people, I'd be like, I kind of like Aaron Burr. And they'd be like, how?
He lived about as eventful of a life as a person could possibly live while not really making it into the history books in an important way. Like he really didn't do anything that's important. You can tell the story of America without Aaron Burr, let's just say.
Yeah,
Weirdly, even though according to what happens in this book, he met all nine of the first presidents. He met Davy Crockett, participated in the Wilkinson plot. I mean, he's just in the middle of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and everything, but kind of was just there. He's like the Forrest Gump of the early American Republic in a way.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Probably about like there is things that he did within the state of New York or whatever, but none of those things
Sure.
really held long-term value. He did break up the monopoly of the U.S. Bank that was set up by Hamilton and the Federalists
Most people give
cleverly.
Jackson the credit for that, but yeah, I mean, I guess he was involved in it, but
No, he created what is it, the New York Bank or something like, which now is part of J.P. Morgan or whatever. But basically, he helped set up a utility company for New York because there was a limited amount of water, and he slipped in
yeah,
like,
yeah, I remember reading, and actually, I think Hamilton helped him with that, if I remember right. They set up a
yeah,
private
he
company. Yeah.
basically outsmarted Hamilton, and I think that is a big problem between the two of them that we'll get into.
So I went to this Irish bar the other day, and there was a big plaque on the wall, and it was just this history of this guy who basically did everything that we consider modern New York. The guy like broke up Tammany Hall, like set up the water system, the fire department, everything. I can't even remember the guy's name, right? He's a local hero. It's kind of what Aaron Burr, if he hadn't shot Hamilton and maybe been vice president,
Yeah,
he'd be that guy. He'd be like, oh, he's important, you know,
I
he's an
mean, yeah,
important
Aaron
person,
Burr did set
more
up
important than
the
I'll ever be. But unless something really crazy happens and I end up having to like save the country from like a nuclear holocaust or like the zombies or something. But as things are going right now, I don't expect to have much of a place in American history. So I think Aaron Burr's got me beat.
this book, Burr by Gore Vidal, is basically a fictional telling of these early days that we've been talking about, the creation, the Revolutionary War, the creation of America into its infancy through the eyes of Aaron Burr. And obviously, there's a fictional narrator, Charlie Schuyler, that
Not one of those Skylers.
no, and that's pointed out right away.
Important to note. And actually, people might know what I'm talking about now because of, again, Hamilton. There's a couple of Skylers that are characters. When I would say in like late high school and into college, every time a girl that I knew got pregnant, she would always have a baby and name it Skylar. And I don't know why that was a thing in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Well, didn't spell it the
I
way
think they did. In my head, I was spelling it Skylar. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't associate it. I didn't know who the Skylers were in history. I'd never heard of them. So it was just a name. But now I'm looking back, I'm like, was that some weird American history reference that every, like, what is the word I want to use? I'm not going to use a word, but the girls that I'm talking about that they all named their kid after for some reason. But no, I don't think so. I don't know where that came from. It was just a fleeting moment in American history.
What do you think the point for Burr or for Vidal is in writing this book?
So I don't actually know the chronology of when he wrote Julian, but I think he just picked two fascinating characters. He ended up working this Burr book into a longer thing called the Foundations of Empire or Narrative of Empire or something series, and
Yeah,
that
there's like
one,
seven of them.
yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. I have the Washington D.C. one, and I'm planning on reading it. But anyway, those are just more like stories about American history, and I think he sort of changed his vision, if I'm not mistaken, because the Julian one is just like the Roman emperor who tried to bring back paganism to the Roman Empire, like after Constantine, is just a
Mhm.
fascinating character. Like I want to hear that story. Like when I saw he wrote that book, I was like, I got to read that. That's cool.
Yeah,
And Burr is the same kind of thing. He's just kind of a louche, interesting, sketchy. Like we said, not super important, but like important enough that it's worth reading about. I mean, the guy met everyone in early America.
for
So
sure. I mean, this was the appeal, the individual that is Aaron Burr that we can find in history is just fascinating. But
yeah.
I also think Vidal is kind of trying to take down a bit the legends of the actual founding fathers that.
So that's the question that I wrote this down as a question, right? It's so the version coming out of the book is written through Burr's words given to Charlie Schuyler, obviously. Okay, so
Mhm.
we've got a viewpoint character is giving us all this information through another viewpoint character. So right there, red flag that that's an unreliable narrator to me.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if Gore Vidal is saying these bad things about George Washington or whether he wants us to think that Burr is kind of a apologist blowhard. that's like, oh yeah, I told George Washington he shouldn't have fought for New York City. I said he should have pulled the troops out right away, and he didn't listen to me, and it was a disaster. It's like you were just some schmuck. You didn't tell George Washington anything. Is one way of
That's
reading it, you know?
possible.
It's like
You
how
know,
everybody's dad was at Woodstock, you know? It's not true. It's just something that people say. I don't know. I was on the fence about whether does Vidal think that of George Washington and Jefferson? Because they're not wrong. They're not wrong portraits of those guys.
no, this was, I think, the question. I think when you read this book, again, what you're pointing out is the unreliable narrative, right? We all should go into this, if we know anything about Aaron Burr, not really wanting or knowing we should trust his version of these things. But at the same time, like, this book took me probably longer to get through than, your typical thing, because every fifth page I'd be like, did that really happen? You
Oh
know,
yeah.
and, and,
Yeah.
and I go in and look it up. And granted, it's from his viewpoint, but everything that Vidal put in the book, as far as people being in certain places, actions that happened, really were pretty well backed up with
There's no lack of research, right? There's no lack of research.
right.
And there's a couple of points where he changed things on purpose, put two people in a room together that weren't really okay, fine,
For
not a big
sure.
deal. There's two major points that I've seen him discuss elsewhere, but he doesn't actually talk about in the afterword or in the foreword to this book. Is that first of all, there's the whole reason why Charlie Schuyler is writing the book about Burr and interviewing with is because Martin Van Buren is about to be the president,
Yes.
and his enemies want to make him look bad by saying that he's actually the son of Aaron Burr. So they're trying to
Mhm.
prove that. And I looked it up. I did a little research while I was reading the book, not even thinking I was gonna, do this podcast, but I looked it up and there's no evidence of that whatsoever. I don't even think it's supposed to be true in the book. So
Well, it is true in the book.
Martin Van Buren is?
Yes. So in the last page of the book,
No, we found out Charlie is
no,
Aaron
and
Burr.
and if you so who's the guy, Swartmouth or whatever
Yeah,
his name
swore
is?
out, yeah.
He says that's your big brother.
Okay, okay. So he does think that Van Buren. Okay, so I wasn't sure, but anyway, there's no historicity to that as far as I know.
No, no, there were rumors though, contemporaneous rumors
I
at the
didn't. I couldn't
time.
even find that. I couldn't even find evidence of that.
I
Maybe that's a
did find that.
deeper dive than I. But and then the other major one, which is a major question about Burr's life, maybe one of the first things that anybody would ask is, what on earth did the two of them get in a fight about, Burr and Hamilton? What was it Hamilton said that was
Yeah.
so bad about Burr? Gore Vidal just makes it up.
Yes,
I saw, I
absolutely.
watched an
100.
interview with him, and he was like, "That could be true." I don't know. He just came
The,
up, and it was good. It's very salacious. It's definitely worth shooting somebody over, honestly, especially in those days, that kind of talk.
yeah.
So, but
Um,
again, I didn't see any reason to think that that was the truth. So anyway, the story was that he was having an incestuous relationship with his daughter, who's a really interesting character in her own right because she has the same name as Burr's wife. He was very close to
mhm.
her. In reality, that part's true. He had a very close relationship with her, and she died in a really tragic shipwreck sometime not long after she got married. So I want to say she was maybe in her 20s or something like that. And it was like,
Yeah, I think it was 1812, if I remember. Her
that's
10-year-old
earlier,
son had just died of malaria or something like that.
probably yellow
Um,
fever. Yellow fever was
month,
killing everybody in this
maybe
book.
it was yellow fever months before that. The thing about Burr is, again, if you look at certain things of him, obviously he's like the first American scoundrel, right? But he also was more progressive in many ways than many of the founding fathers. He in 1785, I think he put forth legislation in New York to free all the slaves in New York State.
I mean, that
Um,
right there, you're burying the lead. I think for most people listening to this, they wouldn't realize that there were slaves in New York at the time of the American Revolution, which is wild.
True.
Like, do you know what Sojourner Truth's first language was?
No.
Dutch, because she
Okay.
was she
Yeah,
was
makes
enslaved
sense.
in New
Yeah.
York, and
Right.
and that's where she began her. So I mean, that's just wild. That's like a broken version of American history that nobody. By the way, Martin Van Buren, only American president to not have English as his first language, also spoke.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting little kind of details in the book about how he would speak to people, and I'd never realized that. I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, this is really fascinating." That
yeah.
like he speaks Dutch. He's still left over from New Amsterdam kind of
Yeah, there were
era.
still lots of powerful Dutch families all along the Hudson Valley
Mhm.
area, well into the 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a
Yep.
Dennis Miller joke. where he met some Dutch people in New York, and he was like, "Oh, what are you going to see?" And they're like, "We are going to Harlem." And he was like, "Oh, just want to warn you, the Dutch influence there has waned a bit."
That's pretty funny. You know, I actually have Dutch ancestry
Uh-huh.
from my father's side through my grandmother. They were the Vandervoorts. So
Okay.
they were one of the first Dutch families in New Amsterdam. And if you go into Greenpoint, there's Vandervoort Avenue, and that's named
I've been
after
to
my,
Greenpoint quite a bit recently, actually. That's interesting.
yeah. It's over by the canal, so it's like the crappiest part of of Greenpoint.
I can
Um,
imagine. Yeah. By the way, something we haven't talked about at all yet. We
oh,
should be
drinks.
drinking something. This is Toasting the Classics. This is not just sit around and talk about a book. This is
Yep.
Toasting the Classics. So what we chose was Madeira, and I think it's because it's mentioned a couple of times when these early Republic guys are drinking at various bars, right, in the city.
Yeah, so in the early parts of the book, when they're out drinking and whatnot, they often mention the Madeira. Doing a little research, apparently it is what they toasted the Declaration of Independence to.
That makes sense. I wonder if I know they stopped in for a drink at Francis Tavern on the way over to Weehawken for the duel. So that they may
Yes.
also have toasted with Madeira before that. That I could imagine that. Although I had port when I was there, and I think the reason I had it is maybe because I'd heard that it was port that they drank. I had a heck of a time, I should say, finding Madeira. I went to
Mhm.
one place and the lady just looked like at me like I was insane, and
Really?
she had to look it up. She'd never heard of it, so I was like, all right. So I walked, I don't know, 5 or 6 blocks over to a place that I knew on Broadway, and they had one bottle. It's called American Madeira, which
Okay.
is a dark omen, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a much clearer, it's a much yellower color than I would have thought. I was expecting, but then I guess this is kind of on the way towards brandy fortified wine, right? You're basically
Yes.
taking
So mine looks
taking.
very similar to yours. I had a bottle that had been around for 5 years. This is Broadbent, which
Actually,
is a pretty popular one. I don't know if you've done any research. So, Madeira wine is fortified wine from the island of Madeira, which is a Portuguese island off the coast of Africa. And, you know, they would ship, it was a major kind of first stop on the way to ship, you know, and sail around the world. And so they'd stock up on wine, and this was wine that was made on the island. Basically, they'd fortify it, and what happened was they'd find sometimes that during the trip, you know, they're going to these tropical hot places, long trip, through the jostling of the wine in the boat, and the heat basically changed it. It oxidized it and changed the flavor of it. And people found that that was much more sought after than what it originally was.
I don't
And
mind this at
so,
all. This I was expecting this was a $13 and I want to say like maybe a liter. I like the taste of this. Maybe this is
yeah,
gonna make me feel terrible tomorrow. That's I had the experience. You and I got that really nice bottle of whiskey when we went camping a couple of years ago up
yeah,
in
yeah,
upstate.
yeah, yeah.
And I remember we drank the entire bottle of whiskey, like hanging out around the campfire. We were like
It was
throwing
good.
sticks into the forest and stuff, and we were like maniacs, like we used to be when we were kids. And we woke up at 8 in the morning and just went about our business. And I was like, is it the quality of the alcohol that,
I have no idea.
like, if you drink good alcohol, you're not hungover? Because we drank a bottle of whiskey. I could tell you,
Yeah.
if I went out and had 3 glasses of whiskey out here in the city and woke up the next morning, I would feel horrible.
I think about having a glass of whiskey and I have a headache, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
how we did that, you know, that night. And for sure it was fantastic whiskey.
It
Maybe
was.
just being out in the open air or something like that, you know, to have some
Yeah, maybe. No ill
yeah,
effects
so
at
the
all
stuff
the
would
next
make
day.
this round trip. And so it was this big long process of like sailing this wine all around the world. But anyways, it became oxidized. And I think why it was popular during the time is apparently this stuff is supposed to last like for months to years after you open it up and not spoil.
I was gonna say it's probably because of the high alcohol content. It's almost like a distilled. I mean, it's partially. So what it is a lot of the time, it's brandy, which is essentially
Right.
distilled wine. It's like you take wine and you put it through the process you would make to make whiskey or something like that. But then you just mix that back in with the regular wine, and you get a stronger, not a brandy level
Mhm.
of alcohol content, but somewhere in between, a little bit more of a bite because it's more alcoholic. I think this tastes pretty good.
Yeah,
Maybe
this is kind of like sweet with a little like carameliness. But why it was popular, I think, is even more so than all those other type of things. It kind of retains its wine character more than like a brandy or something like that, but
Mhm.
it
Yeah,
lasts forever. And so if you don't have a refrigerator or a cellar or anything like that and you open it up, it's going to be good for a while. So I think during that time period, even though we think it tastes good, I think also the fact that it could just last and not spoil, and you
sure.
didn't have to drink an entire bottle and hope you felt good the next night.
Well,
Or
much like in the old days, people used to drink beer all the time instead of water because beer was safer than water. Because if you set a keg of beer sitting around, then you could actually drink it
exactly.
later.
Okay.
Anyway, so I'm enjoying the Madeira. I recommend actually that you get this, but expect it to be, it's stronger than wine. I would say wine usually floats somewhere around 10%, and this is closer to 20. So it's somewhere in between a distilled liquor and wine. Anyway, tasty though. Different
Mhm.
taste than wine. There's definitely a smell to it that smells potent.
Oh yeah. It actually tastes less potent than it smells like. Like the you stick your nose in the glass and you're like, oh boy, this is gonna. All right.
Strong points of the book for you. What did you like about it?
I,
Do you
you
know
know,
anything about Gore Vidal? Have you ever read him before?
no, I haven't. I certainly I'm interested in reading more of this series. I think there's 1876 or something like
Hmm.
that is the
Yep.
title of one. There's Lincoln. Those three.
I
Um,
think he won a bunch. He might have won a Pulitzer for Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. I think that
yeah,
might be his great book because they used to have a rule that they wouldn't give Pulitzer prizes. I might be saying the wrong prize. I think it's a Pulitzer, but anyway, they used to have a rule that biographies of neither Washington nor Lincoln were eligible for the prize because there was always some great book every year written about those guys. And
right,
Gore
right.
Vidal's book about Lincoln was so good, they were like, this one gets the prize. Come on.
Yeah, so basically, from my understanding, that is in this series of empire builders or whatever it's called, there's like 7 or 8 books.
Hmm.
Lincoln's up there and Burr is considered right behind it. But yeah, definitely would want to read those. Obviously, it's not history, but it's kind of
Oh, it's
giving
pretty
you the
darn
history.
close. It is in
Yeah,
terms of learning about the history, right?
for sure. And so you're learning history in such an enjoyable way. Like
Hmm.
the narration, the writing is just so easy. It really is like when I'd sit down and read this book. I like to read history, but there are times where I'm really interested in the subject matter, but it can be a slog to get through.
That can
And
be a slog.
this is taking history and just making it about as fun as it could possibly be. And
Yeah,
for
this
me,
this is a good read. And also,
I,
I thought it's really like it's got a lot of like adult content. It's funny. It's got a bunch of good scenes. I think this would make a terrific multi-part prestige TV show. I really think
yeah,
if it weren't for Hamilton, I think somebody would have done this already as a really good TV show. I think it's a little too on the nose in an era when we all saw Hamilton, but then again, I don't know. Probably pretty cool to watch it from this guy's perspective. You get a great actor to play Burr, somebody with a lot of charisma, kind of sketchy, you know.
yeah.
I think you'd be really entertaining. I mean, you're meeting.
I would watch it.
I would definitely
Part of
watch
me
it.
when I finished the book was like, I was a little sad. I was like, oh man,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
such a fun little journey that it didn't want to end. So if there was an actual show of this, I'd be binging it, this
I mean,
weekend.
did you watch Death by Lightning by any chance?
No, I didn't. What's
It was
that?
the one about the assassination of James Garfield. The second
Okay.
it came up on Netflix, I was like, "Oh, I'm watching that. That's awesome." So I watched it right.
Yeah.
It was great. I thought it was really good. I had a couple of actors that I really like. I think I've talked about it before on the pod, so I won't go into too much detail, but highly recommend it if you like dramatized American history. And I didn't know anything about James Garfield and Chester Arthur and whatnot. So I,
Yeah, I know. And one of the reasons of Vidal's book, the 1876, is that whole era. And I was like, I know nothing really
oh,
about that.
probably about Hayes, right? Probably about the election of Rutherford, because it's actually very similar. It's a tie. It's
Right.
a different situation constitutionally by 1876, but there's a big tie between Tilden and Hayes. That was the
Hmm.
reason why we ended Reconstruction essentially. So that would make a really good story. That's not in Death by Lightning. Death by Lightning is
Okay.
like if maybe 4 years later when Garfield's elected in like
Okay. Right. Right. Right.
1880 or whatever that is. This one also because we've sort of touched on it, but Burr and Jefferson tied in the third. Well, it wouldn't be the third election, but for the third president of the United States anyway, because I think both Washington and
Yeah.
Adams had 2 terms, if I'm not mistaken, and they tied. And essentially, that's the one thing where everybody talks about Burr as such a bad guy. He's so dishonest. He would do anything to get power. And in that situation, both in this book and everything else I've ever read, he essentially was like, "Well, I gave Jefferson my word that I would get him to be president," and so he stepped down and let Jefferson be president. And Jefferson was like, psych. Like, I'm not gonna let you be president. He just stabs him in the back really badly, actually. Jefferson ended up, he was supposed to be president and then help Burr succeed him. And he basically was just like right away, let Burr know. He's like, I'm not doing that, by the way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Yes. That absolutely. I looked that up too. I was like, okay, there's real bad blood already between these two. And
Yeah.
Burr did seemingly the hard work of basically Jefferson couldn't win the presidency without securing New York.
Without New
And
York, right.
what Burr did was like a bunch of brilliant different moves that was essentially outmaneuvering Hamilton again, and and securing New York and securing the votes for them. Now, how they voted for president back then was obviously much different than it is today. And you
Yeah.
did one vote for the vice presidential candidate and the president, but they both counted towards the president.
I think was changed by the 12th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
One of the
after
first. It's
18,
before the 13th
1804.
and after the 10th. It's either the 11th or 12th, but they changed it after
It is
this.
the
So,
12th.
which would be
Yeah,
crazy, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be crazy if no, sorry, Kamala Harris was just Donald Trump's vice president? They had to work together. Actually,
yeah, yeah,
I kind of think it might be good in a way. It might
for sure. I mean, you
force you to
wouldn't.
respect the other person, but I don't know how if that's how it actually worked in those days.
I mean, really, the only time that ever happened where it was like the other party was Jefferson was the vice president for Adam. After that,
Right.
then
Well, that was the only time it could have happened because essentially whoever George Washington thought should be president was going to be president. So Adams was
right,
president. And then he was less of a figure. People weren't as impressed with Adams. So there was an
he
actual
only
election.
lasted, and
So,
so he loses to Burr and Jefferson. They tie, and essentially how it was supposed to work is you had a plan where you basically have one guy who doesn't vote for the vice president or something like that. That's how it was supposed to work
mhm.
before. And so basically, I think they had like 71 electoral votes each or whatever. And so somebody was supposed to vote for like, George Clinton or something like that. And so then it would be Jefferson 71, Burr 70, Clinton 1. And so Burr would then be the vice president. But for however it worked out, whether it's scheming by Burr or whatever, it ended up being a tie. Burr then, there's already bad blood, as you mentioned, between the two of them. Burr did the work to get them to this point. I don't think he necessarily foresaw it, but maybe he did. And he said, hey, if it's going to happen, I'm not going to like not take the presidency. And so he didn't ever really advocate for himself in the book, but also outside of this fictionalized version. All historical accounts say more or less he didn't go out, scheming behind everyone's
No.
back to
No, he
try
didn't
and
seem
get
to be
these votes.
gunning for it as hard as you would think if he was really just this ruthless political operator. You'd
Right.
think if he wanted to be president, he would have put in a little effort somewhere and he would have been. He wasn't that
Yeah.
far off. So that doesn't seem to have been the motivation.
It,
I kind of think he just liked living the good life and, being
yeah.
like a powerful person in New York and being part of things. And that came with being president fine, but he sort of just seemed to enjoy kind of
Yeah. I
running
mean,
game on the country.
I think also he gets this. There's definitely, there was Washington, and it was kind of like a partyless system. But as soon as Washington was going to be not the president, there was already these factions, right? And you
Mhm.
had the Federalists, and then Jefferson and Burr were of the Democrat Republicans. There was definite divide there. And maybe that's an Aaron Burr thing, right? Like, what did he stand for? I think that's a curious thing that really angered a lot of people at the time, right?
But could you imagine living a better life? Like in some ways,
Yeah,
could you really ask for anything
yeah.
else
So
out of,
let's give a quick
I
synopsis,
mean, he never
okay?
had a family, right? He never
Yeah.
had like family life. He
Oh,
had a
he did.
wife. His wife died young. His daughter, I guess he had his daughter, but I think he didn't have his daughter and his wife at the same time. I
No,
think,
he did. So his wife, his daughter is at the same time, right? So, but his wife is older than he is, right? And then she dies from cancer. Now, here's something that's interesting that I found out about him, and we can get into it a little bit more when we're talking about him and Jefferson. So, in my research, and this happened, I think in 2000, in the 2000s. So this is after Vidal wrote his book, maybe even after he died. But there was always this lore within this African American family that they were descendants of Aaron Burr.
okay.
And so, in the research of this, basically his wife had a servant. She's never in the history books or in documentation or anything listed as a slave or anything like that. But definitely probably was, or an indentured servant or something. She came from Calcutta. So she has this South Asian servant. Burr essentially has an affair with her, has two children with her. They end up living in Philadelphia. I don't know if that's because he's in Philadelphia, when he's within as a senator or something like that, or whatever. But he has one of the children why he's having children with his wife. She dies shortly after that. Those children don't live, as often was the case at those times. But anyway, so he has these half South Asian kids with this South Asian woman. But the family lore also isn't that he was an awful guy and he was like taking advantage of her, but that they were actually secretly married after his wife died, and he took care of the kids and things like that. They took his name immediately. So they were Burrs. They became part of the free African American community in Philadelphia.
I want to point out a discrepancy here, though. It doesn't sound like they're African.
I guess if you're half South Asian, in the 1700s, early 1800s, where do you go? Right. So, but anyways, they moved into the free African American community. So these kids that he has with this South Asian woman go and they become part of free Black community in Philadelphia. And the son becomes an abolitionist, running people through the Underground Railroad through his daughter. So his grandson is the second African American author ever to publish a novel in the mid 1800s. And anyway, so they become.
And then one day, that great grandson was playing basketball on the court in West Philadelphia, got in a fight with some guys, and ended up in Beverly Hills.
So, but anyway, so now I think like the president of the Aaron Burr Society is this woman, a Black woman. I think she's a professor in New Mexico of law, a law professor in New Mexico or something like that.
Probably UNM. I feel like I almost would know this person if she was at NMSU, but
that happens. And you juxtapose that against Thomas Jefferson. And when I first read this, I was like, oh, this is messed up, because part of this is Jefferson is the villain in this book, right? Outside of Hamilton.
In some ways,
there's two villains, Jefferson and Hamilton. Washington is
Hamilton's his nemesis. I don't think he's a villain. He doesn't really portray Hamilton as a bad guy or anything. He doesn't think much of him, but I think he thinks more of Hamilton than he does of, well, I don't know. I think he thinks quite highly of Jefferson too. He just thinks he's kind of a snake. But he definitely is impressed with his abilities, which I think is kind of the story of Jefferson. Jefferson was kind of a hypocrite and, wasn't a cool guy in a lot of ways, but also was a really impressive individual in a lot of other ways. He's a really complicated, a really brilliant guy, a really complicated person. I don't really know much about whether his presidency was any good. And he wasn't a military leader in the revolution the way Washington was.
So where this book, going back to what we thought, like the point of the author writing this was, where I think it gets to maybe he is trying to
kind of rehabilitate Burr.
Not necessarily rehabilitate Burr, but like say, hey, are these guys any different than Burr? And at the same time, okay, if they're not these perfect people, what can we learn from them? And so when Gore was writing this was in the Nixon era. And
Nixon, we haven't even talked about that. This book came out in 1973. This is a great time to poke holes in American historical figures. This is like the low point of American patriotism and willingness to put up with.
We're also living in a time where this book, I think, in what it's trying to do, if you're thinking about it, a parallel to the time of the Nixon era to kind of some of the things that are happening now. So Jefferson definitely abuses his power for a guy who felt like the states could disintegrate the Union at any moment and all these type of things. And really didn't, the Federalists were the ones who wanted a more powerful centralized government. As soon as he got his hands on the presidency, he was doing things.
The central government didn't look so bad all of a sudden once he was.
Exactly. And
it's like the Democrats with the First Amendment recently. That they're like all of a sudden when Trump's the president, they're like, hey, the First Amendment, you can't stop people from saying what so.
And so I think to me,
Jefferson's a hypocrite. I think talking about the whole Sally Hemings thing and Burr talking about that is like one of the number one ways that what. Have you seen the Key and Peele sketch, by the way? where
No, I
there's
don't. I mean, I've probably seen it, but I
there,
don't
there's
remember
there's a
parts
bunch
of
of
that.
people getting their DNA results and being and
Yeah.
like the white guy will be like, oh, it turns out I was related to Benjamin Franklin, and
Uh-huh.
another white guy's like, oh, it turns out I'm related to Albert Einstein on my mother's side,
Uh-huh.
and the black guy's always like Thomas Jefferson. And they interview another black guy and he's like
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson.
Also, a weird term I learned that I didn't know was something that was ever used was when, Burr goes down to Monticello and Jefferson's just surrounded by his slaves and things
Right.
like that. And there was the reference to bright slaves,
I'm
which
guessing
meant
that means light skinned.
light skinned. And so,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
Sally Hemings was like 1/8 African American or something like that. And she
Sally
apparently,
Hemings was not only Jefferson's lover, she was his sister-in-law. The whole
yeah.
thing,
So,
the whole thing is
so
just
she
I
was
always
supposed to look exactly like his dead wife. And so basically, he had this
because
woman.
she was related to his wife.
Yeah,
She was
she was
from
his
that
half
family.
sister. She
She
was
was
her half
essentially
sister.
the offspring. But whenever I think about that situation and what life was like, not just on Jefferson's lands, but also in Washington's lands, when you read a description of the lives of enslaved people, and then you read about them on a different, it's just such a bizarre foreign country that these people lived in. It's not what it's not
Right.
100% what you think it is from what we learned about what it was like right before the Civil War. Before 1800, it's just this really diverse, strange economic system with just some awful things going along at the same time where a lot of black people, a lot of enslaved people are being treated like humans by the people that own them. And it's just creepy and weird and fascinating in a certain kind of way. And we don't really learn enough about it. We don't learn enough about the details of it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you look back on it, and there were people, Aaron Burr, one of them, who saw this as not right, right? Not something that you should force people
Right.
into. It was different than what I think, at that time period, than what became like antebellum, like slavery in the Deep South and everything like that,
Yeah.
which,
Well, there's a reason why people point to the invention of the cotton gin. It first of all gave slavery like a whole new life and intensified how bad slavery was, and because a lot of how bad your life was if you were enslaved was what was your job, right? What were you doing?
right,
At Mount Vernon, George Washington owned people. Nobody wants to be owned, but essentially their life was just working on small farms all along the river. Some of them were free to make their own money and they fished and they did all kinds of diverse economic things. If you were in the Caribbean and you were on a sugar plantation, you had like a 50% chance of dying a year or two into that job. It was like a massive, like people just died by the thousands doing that. And cotton was
right.
somewhere in between,
Well, that's why they
you
had to
know.
bring in African slaves in the first place, is because they basically killed off the natives in the
Yeah,
Caribbean.
well, yeah, a lot of that had to do with diseases, right? Well, I don't know, we're getting onto a weird
Yeah,
sidetrack about slavery because
other
it's a,
things.
it's a fascinating historical subject that people don't talk about enough, probably because on one side, everybody would be trying to prove that being a slave was awesome, and on the other side, it would just be the opposite argument, and
It
it's not a
it
description
certainly
of,
wasn't awesome, but in
no,
that
no.
era, it probably wasn't. It was something that nobody would want to do, but it wasn't the horror that I think it eventually became,
Your
like you said,
daily life
afterward.
might not have been the horror, but the fact is, the thing I always point to is when Sherman's army marched through Georgia, there was not a single person that said to themselves, "Nah, I think I'll stay. I think I'll stay on the
Yeah,
plantation."
yeah,
Everybody left because nobody wants to be owned by somebody and at the whim of
yeah.
somebody else to sell you or sell your. I mean, that's unimaginable. So it doesn't really
But at the
matter
same
what your
time,
job is. Nobody wants to do that. So
for sure, and again, before the cotton gin and before things got horribly worse, again, there were people that were abolitionists that were, saying this should end, even at the less horrific version of it, right? So,
mhm.
it did not sound like we're saying, hey, because there are those people who will, will say, oh, it wasn't such a bad life. It wasn't. These people didn't have rights, right? So,
That's the
um,
thing. That's the thing. That's the thing. I went to James Madison's plantation, and they had kind of changed it at the time. So honestly, most of it was about what it was like to be enslaved on the plantation, which was fascinating. But afterwards, I was kind of like, well, we didn't really discuss the Constitution or him being president or anything. And okay,
right,
a little bit of an overcorrection. But anyway, it was a fascinating story about like the guy who essentially like was his closest servant throughout his life, and just the when they read the will, Madison's estate was in such a bad shape that he had said he was going to free all these people, and he just didn't. He just sold the guy, just like a piece of property, like you would with anybody else. And
Yeah.
that's why nobody wanted it. I don't think that guy's life was all that bad. But can you imagine that moment? Like nobody would sign up for that.
Speaking of Madison and Aaron Burr being this guy who like knew everybody and had this
Right.
vast, he's the one who set up, James Madison and Dolly
And Dolly,
Madison.
yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Another crazy little thing. But I think we should probably, we've talked a little bit about the revolution and the early part of
Do
the
you understand the
presidency.
conspiracy? Do you understand the Wilkinson slash, Southern conspiracy? It's a
I
little
do, but I
confusing
think
to
we
me.
didn't talk about Hamilton Burr.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
okay, probably. Yeah, if we have to
we
hit
should
the
probably talk
if we
about
have to
that,
hit
right?
the highlights, we should
Yeah.
probably talk about that because it's a pretty dramatic story of the quote unquote interview that he had with Hamilton is how everybody referred to the duel. I guess it was a euphemism for a duel was to call it an interview. So he talks about the
Yeah.
story. It's a great part of the book. It really stands out. It's very well written. It's borderline poetic. And Burr kind of talks about it as if like, it wasn't that big of a deal. Everybody used to duel. Like
Which is true.
which is
Which is
which is true, but people didn't often die like that. So it was a little bit, it was definitely a standout among duels. It was a risk when you dueled, but it wasn't what you expected to happen. And
yeah.
Gore Vidal makes a point in the narrative, and this may have occurred in real life. No, no, no. I'm sorry, it wouldn't have because it's the interview with Schuyler. But the day after he gives the description of the interview with Hamilton is when he has the stroke that ends up killing him in the long run. So it's definitely, I
Right.
think, I think Vidal's telling us that this is a stressful subject for Burr, that he does not have unconflicted feelings about that situation.
Yeah, and definitely when we're introduced to the character Burr and Charlie Schuyler talking about him, and he's basically been employed to write this, scandalous pamphlet linking Van Buren as the son of Aaron Burr. And so Charlie Schuyler's kind of prodding and poking for information that will look, get Aaron Burr talking. And one subject that he will never talk about and supposedly never did really was the duel with Hamilton. And
Hmm.
then he eventually opens up to the narrator Charlie and tells him about that. And how it comes about is essentially, we were talking about the election of 1800. It's tied. Aaron Burr's not standing down. He's also not trying actively to take the presidency, but there's keep voting and voting and voting and voting, and it keeps being a tie. And Alexander Hamilton is the one who goes behind the scenes and says both these guys are awful as far as a Federalist point of view, even though Aaron Burr is the one who works with Federalists more often than Thomas Jefferson in the Senate and things like that. He says he's awful. He wants to be a king. That's something that they all talk about at that time period, whether it's Washington as a king or whatnot. They're all fearful of the president basically turning himself into the king. Now, the guy who probably comes the closest to an early era is Jefferson. But anyways, Hamilton makes arrangements and whatnot with some of the Federalist electors that are voting and offers them some things or whatever and makes it happen so Jefferson becomes president. And I think if you're Burr and you have already this rivalry with this guy, you're really pissed off because now also Jefferson's pissed off at him. So he's got two people on both sides of the political spectrum that are basically his biggest enemies. He's got Hamilton and he's got Jefferson. And now he's the vice president. The vice presidency already doesn't have any power. They talk about that. And then he's basically been stripped of any future. Jefferson already was stabbing him in the back. Now, Jefferson hates him because he didn't immediately stand down and just give him, the presidency, even though Jefferson had already stabbed him in the back. And then Hamilton goes around and maneuvers to make sure it is not Aaron Burr who is elected. It's never stopped, right? Whatever's happening between the two of them, I can't quite remember what was causing the boiling up of things, but they've already clashed over the banks and things like that, which was obviously a huge thing for the Federalists to be controlling and their power, and it took a lot of that away when Burr was able to break that monopoly. So there's all this bad blood, even though they still worked on. And one of the things in there is there's this famous murder, right?
Helen
But
Jewett.
Helen Jewett, or is that no? That's the character that dies at the end, right? But there's
That's his girl. That's Charlie's girlfriend. But that's a real
Charlie.
murder. Helen
It's a
Jewett was a
real
real
murder.
woman. Yeah.
And
Is that
actually, to link to Hamilton, I think I mentioned this to you, that she's buried in a cemetery in Manhattan with Hamilton's wife. That
Oh
is
yeah,
now,
Cleo has a game there. JJ Walker Park, is that the one?
yeah, so now
Yeah,
she's paved
Cleo
over.
has a game there next month.
There you go. And so those are the two characters that are buried in this plot that is now just a park where kids play sports. Hamilton and Burr worked together as lawyers to get this guy off from this murder that he wasn't as cut and dry as the one that happened to the girlfriend, Helen Jewett of the narrator, Charlie Schuyler. Whereas that was pretty obvious, and he gets off too there. And so there's all these parallels that Vidal is also working with, right? Like whether it's, things in his contemporary world that he's trying to like show through the story of Burr, but also,
Yeah, he's got a character in the book that's apparently sort of a cipher for William F. Buckley, which
yeah, I
I
saw
didn't
that.
know enough about William F. Buckley to understand that, but there's a gay guy. There's a gay guy in the book who's apparently William F. Buckley.
Yeah, that, by the way, that character is completely useless. Like
I don't
has
remember
nothing to do
anything
with the
about him.
story. It's totally like Gore Vidal does not like this guy,
Yeah.
and he's doing what like Alexander Hamilton did, like write these things
He's a lot like that.
anonymously.
I remember I saw an interview. There was somebody who was interviewing Norman Mailer and
Uh-huh.
Gore Vidal, and Gore Vidal was just like such a arrogant, sitting back and letting Norman Mailer say stupid things and goading him into it, and then
Yeah,
acting all arrogant and intellectually superior. And I was like, "You're winning this conversation, man, but I do not like you at all. Like I feel so
yeah.
bad for Norman Mailer. Like
and
it
and
was
and
ugly."
so that's funny. That's funny that he's doing these like Alexander Hamilton type things in this book.
Hmm.
So Alexander Hamilton, like obviously also a great man, did all these things. Was one of the main authors of the Federalist Papers that helped the Constitution get drafted and enacted. But he's a dick. He's a total dick. He's everything that he always accuses Aaron Burr of.
They're very
Of
similar. They're very similar. They're both very talented. They both never quite reached the like top of politics. They
yeah,
contributed to the situation and had their own part. I guess Hamilton probably contributed more because he was inside the first two administrations to a larger extent.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
he was Washington's
but
like
Burr
right
achieved the
hand.
higher office. Burr was vice president. Hamilton never got that far. So in some ways,
Although Hamilton, again, back in those days, he apparently had like a dubious birth.
well, he
He's
was the
from,
bastard orphan son of a.
yeah, exactly. So that probably was not helping him, achieve
Probably not. Probably
high
not.
elected office at the time. But anyways, these two guys, they fight. Burr decides, I've had enough. There is this weird thing at that time where gentlemen settle things by shooting at each other.
Hmm.
Like you said, often, right? It doesn't end in death. But I have a list of, I think these are just duels that are mentioned in the book. So Hamilton challenged James Madison to a duel, and Aaron Burr is the one who put a stop to it.
Aaron Burr diffused it. Yeah, that's right. I
Right.
remember.
And that actually happens. Alexander Hamilton's son was
Killed
killed
in the duel. Yeah, that's right.
by one of Burr's friends, also, by the way.
I didn't
So,
remember who it was. I know they got in a fight at the opera, according to the musical, but I don't know the actual
yeah, and
book.
that is also mentioned in the book. It was a play or an opera or something like
Yeah,
that.
something like yeah, maybe it
So
was a
Burr's
play. Yeah.
friend Swartwout fought a duel versus DeWitt Clinton, who is a relation to George Clinton, not the musician, but the first governor of New York.
Oh,
Um,
I'm glad you clarified it wasn't the
yeah,
guy from
yeah. I just
Clinton.
want to make sure that the
I've been
people out there
confused
are
about that
listening,
for a long time. I was like,
what
is
else?
George Clinton a vampire? And also, how did he get away with being black and being the
That
governor of
would
New
be
York in
awesome,
1700?
right? And then Burr, one of Hamilton's friends, to try and stop the duel between Hamilton and Burr, Samuel Bradhurst challenged Burr to a duel, but with swords.
Awesome.
and,
Awesome.
and Burr beat him and slashed his arm or something. And
Andrew Jackson he killed a man in a duel, at least one man
yeah,
in a duel,
and
and lived the
and
rest
that
of his
was
life with a bullet in his chest from the duel.
yeah, and that was the one that was shortly after this duel between Burr and Hamilton. He said he was inspired by it or something like that. But so
Okay.
duels are happening.
There were duels
Hamilton,
between Civil War officers during the Civil War, 60
yeah,
years after the duel between. I mean, this
yeah.
is a part of American history until quite late. I wonder when the last example of it would have been, but I don't think it survived the Civil War very long for whatever
No,
reason. The culture
I don't think
shifted,
so.
but
I think you're probably right on that. So this is a common thing. Apparently, part of the interview, as you're mentioning, is to try and have this back and forth with seconds and resolve it.
Yeah.
And you'd think if you're Alexander Hamilton, by the way, these guys are in their late 40s, so they're like our age. Can you
Yeah,
imagine being
they're
like,
they're
I'm
grown
mad
ass
at you.
men. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm mad at you. You know what? I'm not going to say sorry. Oh, you're not going to say sorry or whatever. Well, let's shoot each other.
There's a guy in the Trump administration right now, and I can't remember what his name is, but he was like threatening a senator who was asking him questions in
Oh,
a
it's the guy who just got nominated for the.
is replacing what's her face, the other idiot that was in charge of
Yeah, yeah.
Homeland
His name's
Security.
like John Malcolm
Yeah,
Dipshit.
he believes that dueling is a good way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what does dueling prove? Like who wins the duel? I mean, I guess I kind of get that it makes you respect other men and maybe you don't talk as much smack, but then again, you're just afraid of them. So the guy who's the best at shooting is like gets to be that doesn't make any sense. Like why
Yeah.
would we want that? I don't know. That seems like
So,
a very
so
random way to resolve disputes. It's like
yeah,
it's about as good as like
crazy.
tossing a woman into the river, and if she's a witch, she floats, and if she
Yeah, yeah.
drowns,
She drowned. She was okay.
there's
Oops.
not much of a trial, if you ask me. But
No, and so it's a weird way to settle things, but this is how apparently gentlemen did things back then.
yeah,
And and Hamilton, even with his son dying, just
yeah,
like that year, is like, yeah, let's do it. Also, apparently, again, not necessarily a great shot. They show up, they go over to Jersey, because I don't know, it's not
it's
illegal
illegal
to
in New York.
It's illegal in New York, so they
Yeah,
have to go over to Weehawken. And there's a place where like duels constantly
uh-huh,
happened,
yeah.
and so they go to this place on the bluffs, and Hamilton pulls out his glasses and puts them on, and apparently, and this was recorded in history by both seconds. Burr apparently takes this as, oh, Hamilton's going to try and shoot at me. He's trying to see well
Right.
rather
Yeah.
than off to the side. Well, I'm going to shoot him too. Now, who shoots first or whatever, or why Hamilton missed so
There's different
drastically.
stories. Yeah.
There's all the different stories, but in the end, Hamilton misses and Burr mortally wounds Hamilton.
Hmm.
And then, well, this guy's out of my life. I'm done with him. But I think he also has to know that what's just transpired there is only going to make the downfall of his career that much faster, because
Well,
he
all his
certainly
power is
doesn't.
in New York, and he immediately has to flee to Philadelphia, and then from then
Exactly.
to like I don't know Georgia or South Carolina or something like that. So I mean, he
And
clearly
because he's not going to be vice president anymore. That's already been decided. Jefferson has completely taken control of the Republican Democratic Party. He has to flee his own power base, which is in
right.
New York.
So some of that has to do with the fact that technically New York is the jurisdiction that swore out a warrant for his arrest. Technically, they had no
Yes,
jurisdiction. Technically, it was legal in New Jersey, and there was no reason for that. But it was because Hamilton was
right.
so popular and was almost like martyred by the duel that New York went ahead and went after him, even though there was no really jurisdictional basis to do so. One thing that we usually talk about is we usually try to discuss like we neither of us had read this before. We didn't know much about it, but like what was a surprise for you in reading this book? You had a good
Specifically,
one about the South Asian connection, but
yeah, for me, I think that was a wild thing. Like, especially it added a different context, because I probably, was looking up something. There's an illusion. Part of me wants to know why, if Vidal knew about this rumor, because obviously that's out there. He researched so much
hmm,
about these guys. There's so much accurate historical detail in the telling of this story that he leaves it. And there is a very, I wish I had marked it, but there is a very slight reference to his wife's having a servant that is obviously not a white servant, but also not African. And
no,
that's just the reference there. But
yeah, I don't remember.
why that was left out? It's almost like if he had these kids, by them, he couldn't go in so hard on Jefferson, because he's certainly in Vidal says he likes
She wasn't a
after
slave. It's different. She wasn't a slave. I mean, the worst part is that Jefferson had his own children as slaves after that.
for sure. And it sounds
That's
like
like
Aaron Burr
sick,
took
you
care
know?
of his kids. They immediately became
Yeah,
educated, part of free minority society in Philadelphia. But then again, that could have been used to amplify Burr, right? A little bit as the character, as he's trying to do
maybe.
somewhat. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest surprise. It's just wild to me as somebody who's, had an interest in Aaron Burr. I'm not any Aaron Burr historian or anything like that, but I think I've looked up things about him, read, articles and whatnot, and I just never heard of this. And to have this come to light, they did DNA tests just like they did with Sally Hemings' ancestors and stuff like that, and it was proven that Aaron Burr, those people came from Aaron Burr's line. So I thought that was wild. I think the other thing that could be the close second was that the rumors with Van Buren
I
be
don't
that
think
that
I don't think that has a lot of historical
that
basis, though.
no, but apparently it was there. It was only rumors, and I think again, one of the things he's trying to show is people were always like this. All the bad things that are happening now, things that were
Sure.
happening in the Nixon era, they were happening then too.
Hmm.
These people were human beings. They had ambitions, they had faults, they had all these. They were humans just like you and I, and we've turned them into godlike figures. Refer to the founding. They didn't even agree with each other, right?
No.
Like
Yeah.
they
No.
didn't agree immediately what the Constitution meant, and then we have people talking about, oh, we're going to interpret things as the founding fathers intended, and you're like, but they couldn't even agree on that. The other thing that going in, I don't know if it was a surprise or whatever, but apparently, do you remember Michelle Bachmann?
Yeah. I read the same thing. I
Yeah,
read the
it was
same
a
thing. Yeah.
hilarious little thing.
This
Apparently,
this book made her a Republican because
yeah, she
she
was
was
a
so
Democrat
offended about him trash talking the founding fathers. Yeah. That's
on the
funny.
spot. Did not finish the book, by the way.
Yeah, can you
Just
imagine? Can you imagine
just
having
like
that kind of a like just attitude about things? I actually it's kind of related to I would say that the way he's trashing George Washington and some of the other guys was one of the surprises. If I'd thought about it, it wouldn't have surprised me, but I definitely was caught off guard by how much he punches at George Washington and Thomas
really
Jefferson.
does go after
And
George
then I think
Washington.
kind of likes Jackson, which is strange.
Yeah.
He talks
Well,
of what,
but
and
Burr likes
Jackson comes across. I read now I can't remember if it's actually Ron Chernow also that wrote the Jackson. I think it's H.W. Brands that wrote the Jackson biography, the big tome. And I read it and I
okay.
was like, oh, Jackson's not as much of a piece of crap as you sort of, you usually
Yeah,
like
because that's my
usually the
own
description is,
impression.
we've had two terrible presidents in history. One is Trump and the other is Jackson. And I'm reading about Jackson. I'm like, Jackson is
Yeah.
a much more impressive individual. I mean, yes, he's a bad president in a lot of ways, but he's a much more impressive individual than Trump. So it's
I
not
mean,
really
he
all
did
that
send us
close.
into like a depression. He slaughtered. Apparently, Davy Crockett, broke with him and
Yeah, he
became a
did. He
Whig.
did. But I have to say, slaughtering a lot of Indians wasn't necessarily not in the job curriculum for being the American president in
No,
the
that's also
1830s.
true.
So
That's also
I don't know
true.
that a lot of people really faulted him for that at the time. But yes, when we look back, yeah, that's a mark against his record as a human being for sure. So yeah, that was pretty surprising to me. I had a little bit of family connection to some of these characters. Apparently, I'm related to Wilkinson, the fat
Are
idiot,
you?
the fat idiot
We
that was
haven't even
supposed to do the
talked
cons
about him.
No, we
This
didn't
is
really
a
get
big
into that. The whole
book.
conspiracy to take over the Southwest as it was constituted at the time. And also related to John Marshall, the judge that saved Burr from
Which means you're related to
the
Thomas
conspiracy
Jefferson
trial.
and John Randolph.
John
You're all
Randall.
cousins.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. That I hadn't thought of. But John Marshall's definitely in the family. So sounds like you're pretty high on the book. But what do you think? Are you voting for this one? You going to toast this classic?
I mean, I've never been a guest on this
You're
podcast.
familiar with the concept of
I
toasting,
am
and yeah,
familiar with the concept. I've gone back and forth of just trying to decide what does a classic mean.
uh-huh,
The power that is in my hands right now,
yeah.
to declare such a
What
thing.
is a classic is a
I
big
really,
question, right?
really, yeah. I mean, is it a classic in this genre?
Of
One hundred
historical
percent.
fiction? Yeah, I think so. Definitely with I think this might
Yeah, I
even
mean, it
be
blows it out the park.
I think Gore Vidal's style of writing historical fiction might even be kind of what we see in historical fiction today. It might be that influential on the genre
Yeah.
that when you
And
read, I
that's,
don't
I
know.
think, where then you get into, is it a classic, right? I think that's some of the criteria that you guys have established you use. How influential is it, right? Does it,
Mhm.
um, certainly in the 70s, I think it helped have a lot of people kind of take a second look at our like God worshiping of the founding fathers, and except for Michelle Bachmann, and how they're like, these flawless human beings, and be like, hey, these people also didn't agree with each other. They also had all these flaws. Again, there is a part of our society that really wants to have these perfect heroes and gods.
Yeah, I've
And
never understood that as an argument when people talk about like you shouldn't talk about George Washington. I'm like, George Washington's important. I don't care what you think of him. George Washington is an immensely important person. To say that he was
Absolutely.
also a slaveholder is 100% true, but it doesn't diminish the guy's role. We don't talk about him because he's like Jesus or something. He's a real
Yeah,
guy.
and so that's the other end is I think, and I think Vidal is kind of trying to thread the needle on this as far as like, hey, the people who are saying these people are perfect, but also the people who want to kind of bring them down and say, hey, they had this one flaw, so they're completely worthless as far as like, their accomplishments, their importance, all this type of thing. Because
Did you ever see Dazed and Confused?
yes, of course.
There's the part where they have like the hippie teacher, and she's like, just remember on the 4th of July, the thing you're celebrating is a bunch of white slave-holding men who didn't want to pay their taxes. And I'm like, but that's not all they were. They're also
Yeah, yeah.
important people.
It's
Like,
totally true. That is
you're kind
true.
of
That's
throwing
true.
out the
What
baby
they
with the
were. They didn't
bathwater.
even believe in democracy for the most part, right? But
No, no,
what?
that's one of the reasons everybody hated Jackson, by the way, is because he gave the vote to people that didn't have property,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And that's
So,
when you're looking at Jackson again. He was supposed to be kind of this awful dude, right? But he did some things that are like really important. He made our elections, much more of a democracy. He did let the
for
average,
better or for
again,
worse.
white person, be able to vote. And yes, it is for better or worse. And I think that that's the type of thing. Like, the founding fathers believed in like philosopher kings, and they were, the self-proclaimed philosopher
Yeah,
kings
they're firm
that were going to
believers in a
rule.
ruling class, especially because they rule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but again, they weren't perfect, but they definitely Vidal is threading that. I don't think he's condemning them. I think he's humanizing.
Speaking of threading the needle, what's your vote? You're not giving me your vote. I need to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
your
yeah.
vote here
So we're
before we
gonna.
wrap up.
I think I haven't. I came into
This
this.
isn't
We
the Joe
started
Rogan
talking.
podcast. We can't just talk forever. We with
I
a
know, I
certain
know, and
amount.
I am a yapper, right? I came, but my problem is I came into this not knowing the answer to it. But I think I'm going to add a little bit more to my glass here.
Well, the
Oh, we
recording
have to
is in
listen.
progress, so
I,
this
I
ship
love,
is
I love the part where like every time I'm about to tart.
every time
Um,
we're about to tart, Nate. Okay. You haven't
yeah.
been
Okay.
drinking, have you?
Is it a classic? Yeah, I think I'm gonna pour myself a little bit more in my glass.
How do you feel about Madeira a couple of glasses in?
Pretty easy going down as it turns out. But I'm gonna toast this. I think it's
I feel like there'd be
it's
more duels in our life if we drank something like this on a regular
yeah,
basis.
for sure.
Like if
Well,
you were sucking down 18, 20% glasses of, like 6 or 7 glasses of Madeira at
mhm.
at BAC, maybe dueling would make a comeback.
Again at 47, I don't think I have it in me to get that riled up, but
I
certainly
don't
if I
have it
was
in me to get
younger,
riled up about anything anymore. Like I just can't
yeah.
imagine that. Sometimes I still feel bad about sports, I guess, but not like I used to.
Yeah. But I'm gonna say it
We have
is.
discussed how
Uh,
nothing matters previously in this
yeah,
podcast already, which shows we're both in a good
yeah,
place emotionally and psychologically, obviously. If just
yeah. It
multiple
really
times we
is.
keep
I
talking about
feel
how
good.
the universe is empty of meaning and
And in a
inanimate
way that's,
wood.
we go into that in the book a little bit. I think it touches on those things. I just thought it was a ton of fun. I think it's a great read. I think it's talking about things that we as Americans should be better read on. It's just a fantastic book. I just think I've already recommended it to people I know, and I think I recommend it to everybody. I think everybody should give this a try and
I
read it.
think it's a
It's
good
very
one.
fun.
I enjoyed it quite a bit. I highly recommend that you read Julian as well. It's the exact same style, the exact same level of historical detail. It's just about the end of the Roman Empire, which is like, sign me up, right? That's great.
Okay.
It's a great
Yeah,
era.
yeah,
So
I'll do that for sure.
highly recommend reading that one. Yeah, I think this one's great. I think your vote is the only one that counts because technically this was my idea, as we do.
Well,
So
let's hear yours.
I
I
vote
mean,
for
do
it. I
you
vote
think
for
it's
it.
a classic?
I don't know enough about the genre of historical fiction to study it closely enough and say how influential this one was, but I know Gore Vidal is a major author. I actually think Lincoln is his big book,
It is.
the one he's
It
most
makes me
famous
want to
for.
read that one because if this
I
if
think you should
this is
read
this
that one, and I
good,
think I should too. Yeah, I actually was looking up and meant the Wikipedia article mentioned that it had been a finalist for the National Book Award, and I was trying to find what year that was and what it was up against.
mhm.
I think it lost to Gravity's Rainbow, which is like a Titanic novel, right? I mean, I tried to read it and I couldn't get through it, so I don't know what that says about it. But To lose to Thomas Pynchon's greatest work is probably not any shame for Gore Vidal, but
Yeah, for
I
sure.
also noticed that the same year Augustus was nominated. This book about it's a historical fiction biography of the Emperor Augustus, and I actually just bought that like 3 weeks ago. And
Oh,
I had no, I thought it was a more modern book. I went to this one bookstore and I asked the guy if he had anything to recommend from this one series, and he was like, "Oh, I love this one," so I bought it, put it in my queue. Apparently, they were doing good historical fiction at that time, so I don't know. Maybe there was a shift in how people viewed historical figures, like you said. But
hmm.
yeah, I would vote for this. I think this is a classic book. I certainly enjoyed it. I would certainly recommend anybody read it if you have any interest in American history and or the louche characters that are represented therein. I recommend anybody read it. My name is Dave McArthur. I want to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for joining us. I had here with me today,
Nate Wolf.
and Nate, thanks for joining me. I'm glad we finally got to do an episode together. I hope you had a good time with it. Thanks for taking the time to read a great big book and give me your thoughts about it. So to everybody in podcast land, peace out. We will see you next time. Who knows what we're going to be doing? Also, we recommend Madeira. So I would close on that note. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.